This is the first of hopefully many podcasts where myself and my friend James are going to discuss a number of topics over the coming weeks. Some which I feel that some people may take for granted. We kind of want to ask the questions why and kind of get to the bottom of why things are the way they are and get people's views and opinions on how they feel about those certain things. So I'm Nick, and this is my friend James. Say hi, James.
Hi, everybody. Hoping to have some good conversations. Hoping that you can will enjoy listening to them, and uh, that through interaction we can expand on these topics. As I feel debate is a bit of a dead art form, and discussion as well, and respectfully disagreeing are also in low supply nowadays. Anyway, sorry, you just told me to say hello. Hello, everybody.
You're all good.
Up to you.
You're all good. No, you're absolutely right. I think debate is a very under under exercised tool that's gone unused for a long time, and I think a lot of people need to feel a bit more happy just to have their opinion, but know how to go about um, putting that across in a way that's constructive, so that people can respect that, but also know that they're free to have their own opinion as well. Um,
Mm.
so I thought we start with a soft topic. I know that I'm aiming for us to discuss certain stronger topics down the road, but I thought we'd start with something a little bit softer. So we're going to start discussing like royalty, its origins, why it kind of exists, and what it means to people. Um, and because I know through growing up in the UK, like we've got a royal family, and it is highly respected throughout the world. Um, but I've always just grown up with it being there. It's a thing that has always been there, and I know a lot of people around me don't necessarily respect the royal family. I mean, I don't personally have a problem with the fact they're there. I've always been one of those people that kind of go, why is this one family kind of um, like
Well,
apparently ruling the world or ruling the country and the Commonwealth or whatever else? How did they get there? Um, so
it's very much a symbolic kind of position at the moment. But sorry, we'll get to that in a minute. It's interesting that technically we are a dictatorship, but I know for a fact the moment the royals step too far out of line, they would be deposed. I imagine it's actually not a pleasant life for them. It's very much a gilded cage, and the moment you step off that knife edge, you fall, and it's for example, like the controversy around Meghan and Harry. They've lit. I'm not going to say they've done nothing wrong, but what I'm going to say, in the grand scheme of royalty, in the or in the historical context of what deposed princes or members of the direct royal family can do, the controversy surrounding them at the moment is entirely a man-made. Well, any controversy is man-made, but it's very much a generated media storm about very little. If I'm honest with you, I would actually go as far to say possibly nothing. You know?
yeah, I mean, if you think about it from let's revise the humanity of the matter. And this is a man and his wife who, like, the man was born into this family with
Yeah.
no real claim, especially now that William has had children, and no real
Mm.
claim to any kind of rights of passage, shall we say, that has married his love and wants to live his life, and for doing so has been like the media has painted a certain picture of almost like borderline treachery um, for his
Mm.
position as a prince and the royal family. Like, I can't help but think sometimes that, like, if I was a royal, I'm a very strongly opinionated person, as I'm sure you'll come to learn over the coming weeks. Like, I would really struggle in in Harry's position not to stand on the hilltop and kind of scream, "Who the hell do you think you are to tell me that I shouldn't be living my life?" You know.
Yeah. Well, there are different avenues through doing that, and I guess his 3-part book deal and documentary series with Netflix is his own way of doing that. But it's kind of frustrating that there is a monetary connection there. He is going to be paid for doing this, and it just kind of it's annoying because Harry has fought in our military. He has fought in our wars, but it just like if he really wanted privacy and stuff, then he wouldn't use these tools as a way of making money. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like he
absolutely.
would.
I think growing up, if you think about the two boys when they were growing up, William was very
Yeah.
much growing into the middle to upper class icon, very
Mm,
approachable, down to earth, but stately, um, and and Harry was very much the lad. He was the commoner's person, wasn't he? Much like his mother. Not that she was the commoner's person, but she was very down to earth. She was all too happy to shall we say, get her hands dirty and like get on for lack of a better term the commoner's level
mm.
with them. And Harry was very much the same. Like he showed that. For Christ's sake, he dressed up as a Nazi at a fancy dress party one year, didn't he? Got in so much
Yeah,
trouble for that. Like,
he he did. The weird thing is, back then, it wouldn't surprise me if other people did the same thing. And it's all about context, isn't it?
mm,
If you go to a local and let's all dress up as historical figures, and you show up as Goebbels, but you know it's a context where everyone's going to be fine with it,
mm,
then it's fine.
yeah,
However, walking to there, if you
yeah,
pass
absolutely,
somebody in the street who chooses to punch you in the face, that's a grey area.
absolutely,
You know, like
absolutely.
I guess it's frustrating because
But let's be fair. He didn't dress up as Hitler. Yeah, he didn't
yeah,
dress up
fair,
as the Nazi. He dressed up
yeah.
as a Nazi, symbolising the movement, a movement which still exists to this day, I might add. With
Annoyingly, England did have a Nazi party
yeah,
run by somebody who was first a Conservative, then a Labour, then chose to use that vehicle of fascism as a way of doing it.
we'll
Like,
we'll call him indecisive. Um,
mm, yeah, yeah, you know what? Passionately indecisive. Yeah. Ugh.
so I've got a question for you. Um, do you know? And this is something that I was avidly looking up, which is what led to me asking you if you wanted to get on board with a few podcasts. But do you know um, who who was the first ever royal leader? Not of the UK, but the first historical, the one like the first person that was a king or leader of some description of like monarchical um, power. The first one of history.
Okay, so I know from my own readings of the Bible, I know a lot of old kings, so I can tell you who it's definitely not.
Yeah.
Annoyingly, it doesn't actually go back as far to say the first one. Now, is it the first person who called themselves a king at all, or like an emperor? Like, I don't know, because there's so many titles where somebody claims to be royal. I guess the whole invention of title the first one would have been chief, and then
Yeah, so
chieftain.
I think if you go back as far as what we know in historical contexts,
Mm.
when you're building it based on tribes and things like that, obviously, like the way that we picture that humanity evolved, then yeah, I suppose the leaders would have been chieftains or grand chiefs or whoever. But no,
Mm.
that I'm talking
The
an
Long King.
actual person that was a king, for lack of a better term, a ruler, and is the first person that is known to be a leader outside of mythological past. So this is kind of on the borderline of mythology, like that's how old he is. But we know he was a real person because we found the grave and we found the scriptures that put him where he was.
Okay.
Do you know who that was?
I will be honest with you. I don't have a clue. Who was it?
So the first ruler, the first acknowledged ruler in history that isn't mythology was Sargon of Akkad. So obviously the Akkadian Empire in Sumeria and Mesopotamia.
Oh, okay. So like modern day Iraq and Syria and
Yeah,
all of
like
that, right?
23rd century BC he died. So we're going back prior to the days of Moses.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So a long, long time ago, and this is, yeah, he
Mm.
reigned from like 23rd century, 2334 to 2279 BC. I've got it written here. Yeah, was the first leader of the Akkadian Empire.
Okay. And what? Sorry. Let's repeat his name, and then could you
Sargon.
go on to explain? Barden was that?
Sargon. Sargon.
Sargon.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant name. That literally sounds like something out of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But I do. Sorry, that is history for you, and I do like that Sargon. Okay. Other than the fact that he was the first king, do you know much about his rule or what he
All I
did?
know is that he was the first. He was one of the first great empire builders. It says so. He conquered all of southern Mesopotamia, like Syria, parts of Syria, Anatolia as it was, and Elam, which is part of western Iran. So
Mm.
yeah, that kind of where they hypothesize the Garden of Eden was that area there.
Well, it does. In like the Book of Genesis, it does talk about the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Mm.
So that really puts like a solid location in, and you can always argue like the poeticness of these things, but we'll get onto that at a different thing during a
Yeah,
different one.
yeah, yeah,
That's interesting though. Okay,
yeah. So
all right, and
he was the
that was
first king, but obviously that was the first king in the world. Um,
mm,
the first king that we've got that, as I said, wasn't mythological. But I also quite heavily lean on mythology as well. I think there's always elements of truth within mythology as
well,
well.
yeah, I've heard that like a lot of the Greek pantheon was based on tribal leaders of
Mm,
those original settlements.
mm,
So like there was a Athena or Athena at
mm-hmm,
some point.
mm-hmm.
There was a there was a Ares. There was
Yeah,
there were these people.
absolutely. And if
Um,
you're talking Greeks, then obviously if you go along the line of Plato,
mm,
he told us about the ancient what now is classed as the mythological cities of like Atlantis and that. And Atlantis
mm,
was apparently built by the god Poseidon and was led by um, the king Atlas, which was his son, his first son. Actually, he had 7 sons, and the 7 cities of Atlantis were all led by his sons, but the main capital was kinged by Atlas. And
interesting.
on another interesting note, the first king of Mauritania in Sahara, like that kind of area in Africa,
Mm,
his name, the first ever king of Mauritania, was Atlas.
interesting.
Hence, why you have the Atlas Mountains along the northern ridge of Africa.
Well, that's brilliant. I will just throw out a fact here, just because you've clearly done a lot of good research here, and I'm obviously on a bit of a back foot, so I definitely am going to prepare more for the next one. Um, I find interesting that the word Sahara literally means desert.
Yeah,
So when people say the Sahara Desert, you're
you're saying
literally
desert,
saying
desert. Yeah,
the desert.
yeah, yeah.
And like apparently there's several other things where that is the case, but
Mm,
it really doesn't. It somewhat surprises me that the King Sargon um, was Mesopotamian. I kind of would have assumed that um, the first king would have been African,
Yeah,
as
but
I don't know,
I think
genetically mankind
they say that
started in Africa.
the birthplace of humanity was in Africa, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the oldest civilization or signs of civilization is actually
Mm.
around Turkey and Syria and that area. I don't know if you heard of Göbekli Tepe. Um, it's
I haven't. I know that there's a donkey jaw which has the first signs of marks in it,
mm,
which seems to be a
mm,
counting system.
mm. So
Um,
you know Stonehenge, right? The upright
yep.
stones that were placed, they're about 6,000 years old. Well,
Hmm.
there's Göbekli Tepe is a construct like a city almost of upright stones in Turkey, and they've carbon
Brilliant.
dated. The best thing about it is that this entire city of 20-ton stones that have been like perfectly placed in the ground and oriented north, which going back as far as they were, like was almost unfathomable, is actually 11,000 years old. It is incredible.
Crazy.
The fact
So,
that they had
so,
the
so, do you think that although Sargon is the closest thing that we have to a historical truth of a king,
mm,
they must have had some form of government?
absolutely, this is why I go kind of like towards mythological past, because I think
Those
relying
times did
purely
exist.
exactly, yeah, and um, I mean, there has to have been civilization before. If you think, if you think 14,000 years ago, we were coming to the end of the ice age. How much change went on in the world during that time? I mean, for the next 2,000 years, there was pockmarked with other comet impacts apparently, which
Mm.
caused massive floods all over the world. How much land was washed away, and how much civilization was washed away? If what we're looking at now is civilization starting, say 11,000 years ago, um, then that ties in with the end of what they call the Younger Dryas, which is like the end of the Ice Age. There was a 2,000-year period where temperatures were fluctuating. There were a lot of floods and stuff, and then it ended, and it started to get warm about 11,000 years ago. And if you think how much would have been stripped away and lost in that period of like um, of chaos, then history really would have only had a chance to be started again 11,000 years ago, which means it's an open book before that, isn't it? Um, and all you've got is this word of mouth, as I said about um, Plato's scriptures on Atlantis, and what we've heard in mythology of Lemuria and other continents that were said to have existed. Um, and obviously, there's
Oh,
things that science are looking at now that actually there may well have been a massive continent that connected Madagascar, India, and Australia all together. You know, that's now lost to sea. Um,
oh,
so,
okay.
so
Was
yeah,
was that part of? Was it Pangaea? Was that the original like mega continent? I
I
know that.
I don't know exactly. I mean, I know that history says that Pangaea, like the original continents, were all together.
Yeah.
But um, I know that the continents weren't necessarily all together and all land at the same time. So it might well have been that they were all together. Like all that you see now that is land would have been formed together in its own way. But it's not necessarily that it was all one continent above land. There may well have been rivers and seas that are now countries that are above land.
Mm.
So continents in their own rights are now completely lost under the ocean, which, as I said, is part of that landmass that was between Madagascar, India, and Australia, which is why you've got kind of linking fauna and flora that are similar in Madagascar as you have in Australia. You know, some of the most unique wildlife in the entire world in two of the most untouched places in the entire world. So And the
I
fact
think,
that humans existed in Australia um, when nobody had been there, kind of makes you go, well, did somebody fly them there and just drop them off, or did they have some other means to cross from where civilization was into this country and then get stranded there? Um, I,
well, I think that there are loads of ancient stories of ancient chieftains who sail across seas in order to get places. Like,
mm,
it wouldn't surprise me if there was a slow migration to Australia. Like you've got Indonesia and Malaysia are like the world's. I'm not sure if they're the largest archipelagos, but like you've got loads of little islands there, and it wouldn't
yeah,
surprise me if over the course of
they say that
thousands of years,
They say that
like
all of that was actually just it was continent, it was land that was above the sea, and then
mm,
like through the tectonic shifts of the planet, it got lost under the sea, and all that you've got left now is, as you said, the archipelagos of like Papua New Guinea and Malaysia and all of that. Um,
mm,
um,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
really interesting stuff.
it's a fair point, and like I'm not sure if you know what we'll talk about Aboriginal culture. Another thing, they're actually one of my favourite native people groups.
Mm,
Just generally
I think
their cult their culture of Dreamtime stuff, which in itself, like even the wording of it, you know what? I don't want to
Yeah, we'll put a
undermine
pin
them,
in that one
but
because it
yeah,
sounds like a
yeah,
really good topic to go over, and we'll cover that in another podcast.
yeah.
But going back onto the like the royalty, obviously the royalty. There's always been leadership in society as far back as we know. Obviously, with Sargon of Akkad, with the Akkadian Empire, as soon as there was leadership, there was domination. There was like dynasty. There was
Mm,
um, amazing things. But if you look at mythological terms, they say that leaders in in like the very beginning of humanity, outside of religion, shall we say, but inside of spirituality. They say that the royalty, the leaders, they were the oldest of the spirits that would guide souls into the physical realm, into the physical being, and help that soul then become like adjust into that physical realm, and that was their job. That was why they were so important, because they'd been in their physical form for so long, and they had more experience than these newer souls that were just coming into being, and they were given that status. Um,
that sounds a lot almost like okay, so knowledge, power, and knowledge have always been revered in well, I don't know. I can't think of a single culture which has a disdain for either of those things, for knowledge or for power. Um, it sounds a lot there that, like what you've described, although that may very well have been the first royals, that almost sounds like a tribal elder.
mm, yeah, I mean, um, I think you've got to go back to the point like before. You can't think of civilization, ancient civilization, in the same way that we think about civilization now. So, where there's quite a clear hierarchy to our leaders now, before it would have been completely different. So, yeah, like it would have been. I should imagine it would have been more spiritual than it would have been like dominance, shall we say, or like you said earlier, dictatorship, and like it would have been um, almost um, almost like teachers, spiritual guiders, um, and that's why they were looked up to. That's why they were revered, because they had the knowledge that you wanted and you needed to survive, which absolutely makes sense, I suppose, when you think about science in that the survival of the fittest. Those with knowledge and those with intelligence would have had the power in themselves to survive better than those without it. So they would have been looked up to and would have been respected and kind of in turn placed on their own proverbial pedestal.
Hmm. No, it's an interesting thing, and Is that a direct translation from which language is that taken from? On like which I don't
The
know
it's
which culture?
it's based on um, there's Sumerian, I want to say Sumerian texts that kind
Yeah.
of put it along those lines, but I can't be sure. It's one of those things that I read it a long time ago and it kind of stuck in my head, but who where it came from has kind of slipped away with time, you know. But the fact, like, it was beyond. Um, it was like almost like, you know, those fables, word of mouth kind of um, say kind of tellings. Um,
Hmm. Okay. It's interesting. It's also interesting that I kind of that sounds somewhat credible because you know the first recorded or the first king that we have solid um, evidence of, King Sargon, was also from around that same area, not the same place. And I
hmm,
don't if I have just offended anyone, I don't mean to be by saying those two places are the same. But if you look at it globally geographically, Samaria was fairly close to Mesopotamia.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like so that's interesting there. Okay. And like when do you think this idea evolved?
So what the idea of royalty?
Yeah, so like
I th-
when did it become less of a almost like spiritual parental um
I think along those lines, I think you've got to kind of bring in what we know of the human nature.
mm,
So that would be um, when selfishness, shall we say, took over, because
so pretty
royalty.
early on then.
Yeah, royal. I mean, it's
Sorry.
part of human nature, isn't it? It's very
Yeah.
like humans are, by their very nature, are self-serving, and I don't mean that in an offensive way. I mean, like, it's survival of the fittest. So you put if you, like, I think it's part. It's almost instinctual to be that. Um, if you end up being put on that pedestal, then you end up self-elevating, don't you? And after a while,
Absolutely.
that culture will grow into this. Um, I
Like
am I am a god and I am above you, and therefore you are peasants and you are below me, and that's kind of where it would like psychologically lead. I don't know whether that would have happened over like 100 years or whether that would have happened over 10,000 years. It's almost cause and effect, I suppose, um, where if you give someone, if you give a person or a line of people um, that power, then inevitably at some point somebody will abuse that and turn it into dominance or an act of dominance in itself. Um,
mm,
but I don't. It's not to say. I mean, that sounds like I absolutely go against royalty. Not at all. I think royalty itself has brought some marvelous things into the world. It's also given those that need leadership in order to do great and amazing things. They've also done some incredibly stupid things over their time, so that they're not
well,
they're not
the thing is
immune to that. So
order in and of itself like uh, okay, so order generally is good, I think, but and then this is probably another topic for another thing, but order I always see it as something which expands the potential for what's already there. If you've got a good heart and or if you've got a lot of good people and you expand order, what you get is people who are able to give more because things are more organized. If you've got a lot of aggressive people, then order enables them to become organized, and you get I don't know, you get your first military units at that point, you know, or your first kind of raiding parties
mm,
and things like that of other cultures. Like I don't know, I think that I like order but I also like freedom, and you know what, like I don't want to go too much off on a tangent here. I agree with you in that uh, I like royalty because it there's a clear. It's not just oh well, what decision are we going to make? Well, we're going to have a massive debate, and then we're going to compromise, and then we're going to come up with something that's half effective.
Mm.
With royalty and with like classical royalty, it's just like, well, what's the empire going to do? Well, the emperor hasn't spoken yet. We'll bring it before him, and we'll see what he decides.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
There's just
you think along the lines of like court itself, and I don't mean court as in the judge and jury kind of court. I mean court as
royal
in
court.
royal court. People would bring problems to the king, and the king would go, "Well, we're going to do this," you know. So even even when during those times of should we say dictatorship by royalty, there was reverence and almost dependency on that stately figure
Mm.
to guide and help the nation, and it was their responsibility to support and lead their subjects, as it were. So it wasn't. I don't think it's always been. There have been a number of bad leaders over the years,
Oh,
but
massively.
with power will always come those people that take it too far. But I think when you end up with the leaders like we had, our Queen, obviously, that passed away recently, she was possibly um, the most personal queen that we've or
Mm.
leader that we've ever had. Somebody that sought to um, lead lead the country with her heart more than with the iron fist of leadership, as it were, or at least that's the air that she gave off, I
Well,
suppose.
it's very interesting that like I hate to admit how much I've learnt by watching seasons 1 to 3 of The Crown. I hate the fact that I have genuinely learnt things from that. Um, I'm not going to indict. I'm not going to endorse, but it's interesting that in that show they talk about the efficient, which is Parliament,
Yeah,
and the dignified, which is kind of like the whole
the royalty and the yeah.
the removing of royalty from the day to day dealings with governance.
Mm,
Um, there are times when that can even be used to defang someone, like in the case of Mountbatten,
mm,
who was literally promoted to the point where he no longer had any control over the military because he was the head of the British military. Weirdly enough, at the same time as, but anyway, sorry, I'm not going to go off one. But I yeah, I've got a lot of respect for um for our departed queen. I realise that she wasn't perfect. She was somebody who was born. Um, wasn't she born in the 30s? Like so she would have.
yeah, she was born in the 30s. She was
Yeah.
94 or 95 when she died,
Wow.
and she'd reigned for 70, I think
Yeah.
72
I
years.
I don't think we're gonna get anyone top that for at least a while.
Certainly not Charles, anyway.
Well,
Um,
definitely not. Like it's it's interesting with Elizabeth. I've got a lot of respect because the times that she got involved, like there's not a huge the things that she did. She very much kind of had. She didn't get involved, and a lot of I'm worried that people like hundreds of years from now will see her as a terrible queen because she let countries walk out of the Commonwealth and out of what was left of the British Empire.
I
But I
think
actually have a huge amount of respect for that, because
absolutely. I think
to to be able to let go is good.
I think if sociological mentality stayed as it was, I suppose, 50 years ago, then she could have been looked at, or even further than that, say 100 years ago. If sociological mentality stayed the way it was 100 years ago, like she would have been deposed, I suppose, because of that relinquishing of power. But 21st century,
Yeah,
it
fair play
very
to her.
much, absolutely, very much. I think there's numerous reasons why that she made the right decisions. You know, they are a people in their own right, and they were a subject of the Commonwealth, probably for the wrong reasons, really, because of um, the way they were conquered.
Well,
Um,
we'll talk about. I imagine we'll talk about slavery, the triangular
mm,
trade,
yeah,
the
yeah,
gutting of Africa, because it's interesting. Sorry, you know what? Just really, really quickly,
yeah,
before the slave trade, there's no way in hell we could have invaded Africa, the African nations. They were strong. There was too many of them, too few of us, all of that lot.
yeah.
And it's just really interesting how, um, you know what? Nope, nope. We're gonna touch upon that upon another time, and I also don't want to get your thing banned. But it no, no. Okay,
Yeah,
honestly,
listen. At
honestly.
some point, we will cover that when
Yeah,
we know the ground that we stand on, and we know how far we can kind of go with our
yeah.
discussions. Then we'll go into a bit more tongue-in-cheek discussions, because I've got a lot that I want to bring up. That, as I
Okay.
said,
Well,
the main point of these podcasts is to challenge, not necessarily to say you're wrong, but to say
mm,
this is a topic that not many people know or not many people question, but like we're going to really challenge it. We're going to get into the nitty gritty
okay.
of it and kind of. So it is definitely something that we'll go into, but let's tread carefully for now anyway.
Exactly.
Um,
Okay.
let's
Well,
bring it back
it.
to something a bit more jovial.
Mm,
I had a
well,
look at some silly. I had a look at some silly rules that were brought in. I don't know if you want to hear some of those. So leaders that had some of
absolutely.
the stupidest laws. Okay, so
Mm.
Edward III. Did you know that he banned football?
Was that something to try and get people to do more archery, or is it because he
You're
was
on the right lines. You're
on
definitely
a
on the right
team?
lines. So football back then was a very violent game. There weren't the rules that there are today in the Premier League, etc.
Mm,
It was a very aggressive and violent game, and there was no set like pitch size. Sometimes the pitches were 2 miles long, um, and they would be played with sometimes 50 or 60 people on the pitch. It was almost a mini war with a ball, like a bladder of a live animal, or a dead animal rather, that was being kicked about on this, and there were full-blown riots and fights that would happen. This bloke wanted to go to war. Edward III wanted to go to war, but so many of his people were being injured by playing football. And so many of his people had died because of the Black Death that he banned football because he couldn't risk losing more, because he wanted to use them. He wanted to use them in the war, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. That he wanted to go to war, so he had to ban football.
I I love it because at that point it's almost like, well, violence is wrong unless you're doing it in my name. But
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. You're
like
not allowed.
that's a whole other
You're not allowed.
kettle of
You're
fish.
not allowed to have sport and beat the crap out of each other. Um, like unless you're going to go and have sport on a battlefield for me and do something for me. Rule breakers, interestingly, would receive 6 days in prison if they were seen. Um, they were seen uh,
Playing
fighting.
football.
Yeah, or yeah, playing football rather, which is relative to getting a red card, I suppose. So not much has changed.
I I wonder how many people had a gallbladder of a goat or something just slammed on their trading table
Yeah,
and then were wrongly accused of it, you know?
yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
but anyway. Okay, what
On the topic of sport, Henry VIII was a big tennis fan.
did not know that.
No, and neither did I. Um, and James the First made it illegal. This is on a par with sport, but it's really interesting and absolutely ridiculous, right? But he made it illegal for you to blow your nose in the street. And I think there's a line where you kind of go, oh, I can see, COVID recently, I can kind of understand. Do you want to know why?
Was
Why
was
he?
it was it a plague?
No,
Was it a plague?
no,
Really?
no. It wasn't.
What?
It wasn't
Okay.
because of the plague. It was because he wanted to protect the horses for Newmarket.
Uh, I've got several things I can say about that, but I'm not going to because we're going to keep this civil. Oh yeah.
Oh, what can I say? Power really goes to some people's heads, right? I
Well,
want.
it's interesting, you know, like when you've got these fictitious books, like yeah, like any of the Terry Pratchett stuff, they make jokes about these sorts of things where a king would uh a king saw a cloud that offended him, so he demanded that his archers open fire upon it. Uh, 64 people died in the city underneath the cloud.
Jesus
Um,
Christ.
you know, like you get those sorts of things, and it's just
Oh,
it's annoying that it's a caricature, but it's not too far removed.
yeah, yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
okay. All
absolutely.
right, what's the third? Like these things normally come in threes. Like what's the next ridiculous law that has been made up?
So,
Uh,
and I hope this isn't a trend that continues with the Charleses, but
oh,
Charles II banned coffee.
okay,
Charles
was that because too much of our money was kind of filtering back to the Middle East, or
filtering.
what
I
was
like the use of the words there, but no, um, no.
unintentional? I'm afraid.
Charles II banned coffee and the use of coffee houses because he thought it led to conspirators and people beginning cohorts against him. So it gave people too much time to talk, and when they talked, they realised that he was a bit of an idiot, and he didn't like that. He felt threatened by
And
it, so he banned coffee.
you might as well ban telling jokes because you feel insecure that when people are laughing, they're laughing at you.
Absolutely, absolutely. But
That's
I thought that was I thought that was quite apt. I used to be a barista in a coffee shop, and that was one of the quotes of the day. Um, was that King Charles II banned coffee. Um, thank God
mm.
he didn't. It didn't stand till today, because otherwise I wouldn't have had a job at that time. But yeah, I thought that was some of the most silliest of rules that were brought out over history.
Specifically by royalty. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
Mm.
let's just say not all things that they've brought us have been good, and war obviously aside, some of their rules have been rather ridiculous too. Um,
Yeah, well, that's it. That's it. It's just, it's kind of, I love it as well because when it comes to war, when it comes to rules, when it comes to all of these things, it's always what you can get most people to obey
mm,
or to, at the very least to tolerate. And that's where I think there's a massive change between what is seen as acceptable monarchy nowadays and what isn't. You know, like in ancient times, you'd literally uh, you had the king of was it I think it was Nebuchadnezzar. Literally demanded that everybody bow down and worship a statue that he made, and if you didn't, the punishment was death.
yeah,
Or King Herod, who literally killed all of the babies under 2 years old in a certain city.
Yep.
And
You
I'm just
also,
like,
you know that King
if you
Herod
try and
also,
pull that shit,
King Herod also murdered his own 2 sons.
did not know that. I know that Herod the Great had 3 sons, and annoyingly, he named. Oh, so many of the ancient lines do this as well. In order to create consistency, they named their sons the same name, which just creates so much confusion. Like Cleopatra, the one that's famous, was in fact Cleopatra the Seventh. And then you think, well, what happened to all the other Cleopatras? Some of them died, some of them were sisters, some of them were cousins, but all of the people in that female line had the same bloody name.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Herod killed his sons. Which one?
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. So no, 2 of his sons he murdered, but I didn't know he had 3. But that shows, doesn't it? You look at certain research and it covers certain points, but not everything. Which is why
yeah,
it's so important when you do your research and things like that you look at multiple points because multiple sources
absolutely.
because in the middle of all of these perspectives is the truth, and
Somewhere.
you'll never find the truth directly from one source. So, um, do you know how many sovereign states there are currently in the world?
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so is this recognized by the UN or not recognized by the UN?
This is recognized by the UN.
Okay, and this is anything where there is a sovereign state,
Yeah,
as
as in
in.
king, sultan, you know, sheikh. I think are some is one of the leaders. Yeah,
I'm gonna. You know what? Although there are a lot of countries which are. No, you know what? Sorry, the 18th century. Sorry, the 18th and 19th century happened.
hmm
I'm gonna 137.
137. No,
Yeah.
there are 43 recognized sovereign states in the world.
Get out of town. That few. Like
Yep,
there's over 200 countries.
yep. There are 13 in Asia. There are 12 in Europe. There are 9 in the Americas, 6 in Oceania, and 3 in Africa.
Only 3 in Africa.
hmm
That's really surprising.
Yep. I could name them, but I'm not going to bore you with 43 different names.
Okay.
Needless to
Could
say,
you do you have the 3 in Africa? What are the 3
let me
remaining?
see. Let me see. This relies heavily on me knowing geography. Um,
Is Maui still a? Is it Maui?
mm,
Mali. Is Mali still a?
Mali, yeah, Mali.
Is that still a sovereign state? Because.
No. Oh, Malay
Okay.
in Malaysia. Yes,
Oh, okay.
they've got a. Let me see here. They have got a semi-constitutional monarchy.
Hmm. All right. Well, one thing I guess I wanted to uh, cover with you as well. Like, I realize we will probably end up going massively over time, but you said it's something about this podcast is you want to kind of like look at how things are the way they are.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that I know or something that my brother is massively into is the formation of England
Yep.
as a country out of the 4 states of Mercia,
Wessex.
West, yeah, exact, East Anglia, Northumbria,
Yep.
like those ones all forming together under a single family. Although, interestingly, like that family in itself really struggled to
It was under
keep itself
Athelstan, wasn't
together,
it?
and that's it,
King Athelstan. Yeah.
King Athelstan. And it's just like so. At one point, you had everybody who owned several tribes calling themselves a king, which I'm not. I don't know. I kind of get that. Like everybody needed some kind of order, and there was very little order you could provide. But simply knowing that a land, I guess it comes with the ideas of identity, but the fact that you had kingdoms changing, the land underneath it staying the same, but the people who live on the land identify themselves as a certain country, and
Yeah,
because they identify themselves as a certain country, they then turn to a certain individual
absolutely.
in order to rule them.
Yeah. And I mean, that's even that. I mean, if you think about Mercia and Northumbria and Wessex and East Anglia, like they were all countries post post Roman Empire. So like they were Anglo-Saxon. No, were they Anglo-Saxon? Am I thinking along the right
Well,
lines there?
they would have been a mixture because it's really interesting to know that um, the Welsh were very, very resistant to being Romanized,
Mm,
but once they were Romanized, they also held on to it
yeah.
fiercely,
Mm.
which is why they've
They're reluctant to
still
change.
well exactly, but like they held on to that culture as well, and
Yeah.
it's very interesting when like people say, "Oh, England, you went all over the place and robbed the world, and you're all evil oppressors and blah 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 blah," and I'm just like, that's so historically short-sighted
Absolutely. I mean, yes,
for
yes, absolutely. The Great Britain, like as an empire, did did that. Yep.
horrible things. Yeah.
So did the Mongols. So did the
Mm.
Romans. You know, all we did
Every
was
every
we just copied. You know, we just copied type. So
copy and
let's
paste.
not necessarily
But
judge the English for for that.
but
But
it's interesting though that like when you talk about what is English culture, part of it is that monarchy, but that
yeah.
monarchy in itself has changed hands so many times.
Yeah, even the
And
monarchy isn't thoroughbred English. If there is
no,
anything that you can state is thoroughbred English, I'm pretty sure in my bloodline I've got numerous different genetic codes from numerous different places in the world, and that is
mm,
what I think of as English. That's what I think of as British. I don't.
the fact that we are a mixing pot,
Hmm.
because I guess where I was going was with the earlier thing is that we were invaded, yes, by the Anglo Saxons, but also by the Normans,
Yep.
by a lot of Germanic tribes.
Yep. Yep.
Like the
Like the
reason
Vikings.
why.
Look at the Vikings. I
Mm,
mean, just a point that I don't know many people don't actually know, but you know the Battle of Normandy, 1066. No, Battle of Hastings, 1066. Yeah.
yeah.
So we were invaded by the Normans then. Do you know that the
Mm,
fall of the Viking Empire, or the fall of the Vikings, the end of the Vikings, happened a mere couple of weeks before that
get out of town.
in the Battle of Stamford Bridge. King Harold,
Mm,
the last king of Norway, was
mm.
killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in England in 1066.
Oh, wow.
But
It's just and
because it's
yet we remember the other bit.
absolutely because we like it happened to us. Who cares if it happens to happened to the Vikings? They invaded us. Who cares? But like because the Battle of Hastings happened to us, we were invaded. We were attacked, and we were the ones that suffered. Didn't our king get killed at battle? Um, I can't remember his name now, but yeah, I'm pretty sure he got.
Wasn't it King Harold?
No, King Harold. As I said, King Harold was that. No, it was because it was King Harold of Norway fighting with King Harold of England, and then King Harold of England battled the Norman king. Who was that? And was shot in the eye, wasn't he?
He was shot in the eye.
Yeah. So yeah, but many people just completely overlook the fact that literally, as I said, 2 weeks before Battle of 1066, the Battle of Hastings of 1066, there was a Battle of Stamford Bridge, which ended an entire Viking race, shall we say, for lack of a better term. I know we've all got Viking blood in us now, and of course the Norse are still very much a strong bloodline. So they still exist, but that royalty, that royal line, shall we say, ended
Mm,
just 2 weeks before the Battle of Hastings.
that's interesting. Okay, well, I don't want to go too far over, but like, there's a lot of topics here. One thing I did want to actually ask you because I've got answers for these myself.
Yeah, go on.
Um, who is your favourite ruler in history? or favorite. I guess if we'll use the term king, emperor, I don't know, emir or whatever you want to call it. Even like if it was a pharaoh, go for a pharaoh. But like, who was your favorite historical ruler?
I think my favourite historical ruler, if I was going to go with anyone, once again, I steep myself in mythology. I do believe there is a lot of truth in mythology, and I think if I'm going to go with any ruler in time,
Hmm?
it would be King Arthur.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah, he's a famous one, isn't he?
Yeah, and he was
And
Welsh. Camelot itself, like
it
it's
is
all
Welsh.
that. It's that side of the country, isn't it? Or the
They're very
islands.
proud of that, and rightly
Mm,
so.
mm,
Rightly
yeah,
so.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean,
Okay.
I have no doubt there was truth in that. I mean, the fact that I don't know. I know this is like a bit off topic, but that Hitler actually started to look for the Holy Grail based on the mythology of King Arthur and his knights, because I think one of his knights, I can't remember his name, began with a G, I believe. Um, was it Galahad?
Galahad.
I think it might have been Galahad. He actually looked for the Holy Grail, and it's said that he found it, looked upon it, and was turned to stone and died on the spot, um, with a look of bliss on his face because he'd looked upon the thing he'd sought. And that was something that Hitler used when he was um, searching for the Holy Grail himself, because he wanted weapons that no one else had. But that's another topic for another day.
Again, like you hear all sorts of things.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
there's a no, no. Okay, I've got stuff to talk about on that one, but we'll touch upon that another
Yeah,
day.
but King Arthur.
Another
To
day.
answer your question, King Arthur, I think it
King
was
Arthur.
absolutely
Cool.
fantastic. His mythological story, it has always entranced me ever since I was a child.
Well, the whole round table thing, when most tables are square, the fact that the idea of if you're one of my knights, if you fight with me, then you are my equal. So the
Mm.
round table, the fact that he was, like very much a warrior king, is always going to grab your attention growing
It's
up.
also, it
Yeah.
comes from the days of the brigands, doesn't it? The blue men that used to rule, or like with the tribal force that were on on the islands of the UK before the Romans came, and there was so much mythological like magic, like the Druids and things like that as well, which kind of adds that other element of um,
Mm.
magic, I suppose, for lack of a better
Well,
better term,
well,
to
absolute
it. Exactly.
mysticism.
Yeah. Yeah.
For lack of, I don't mean to undermine anyone. If you are listening to this and you are a druid, I don't mean to undermine you here. But also, like the idea of mysticism, glamour, any of that lot, kind
Yeah.
of really, really adds
Absolutely.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
There's so much to
anything
it.
that is half remembered or forgotten, is always has that element of interest to it. It's kind of sad that if you want something to be seen as uncool, or if you want people to lose interest in something, teach it at a school. But that's
Absolutely.
again, that's another. I hate to say it, that's another topic for another thing.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean to insult any educators there, but the moment something is the status quo or seen to be the status quo,
Yeah. Yeah. I
it,
think I
it
th- I think we're going to cover a lot that will make people question
yeah,
what they grew up learning,
yeah.
and not
I
necessarily for the wrong reasons. I think there's
mm,
nothing wrong with teachers teaching those things. That is
no.
the way it is. But I mean, you come back to the cancer law, where doctors are only allowed to treat what they're told they can use to treat. So um, that in itself is school, isn't it? It's You're only allowed to teach what you're told you're allowed to teach, whether you know
Absolutely.
something else to be true, whether a circle is a circle, like that is what you're told, so
I
therefore that's what you will teach. Um,
like just as you were a barista, and well done for working that up. I spent 12 years on tables.
mm,
Never got to the barista bit, but sorry, that's another story for another time. Um, I did work in a school, and that is exactly as it is. You are told to put elements of yourself, like you leave quite a lot of yourself at home, or you leave quite a lot of it in your car when you walk into that building.
yeah,
But like again, also there are elements of that which is fair enough. Like you're not allowed to put your own views on other people. I completely agree with that. However, the fact that you're not allowed to even admit to certain views or to talk about certain views is
Even if
something which,
even if you know there to be more basis for fact in that perspective,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
you're not allowed
you
to. It's not the mainstream view. Therefore, you know.
exactly.
Mm.
It's kind of interesting that oh, so it was weird. I went to this art show about 10 years ago, and this woman was like sharing a poem that she'd written, um, and like up until the point where she said, "I am a strong black woman," I agreed with everything she was saying, and she was talking about how everyone's free to be whoever they are as long as it's not themselves. And she was kind of talking about how everybody needs to take, everybody has to give up elements of themselves, of their own culture, or of their own beliefs in order to partake in society as a whole. Um, I don't know. All right, like sorry, that's a whole other thing for a whole other time. But
No, I completely agree, though. I do completely
like,
agree. And as
well,
I said,
okay,
that's a subject that we can cover in a later
okay,
podcast.
I've got a couple of statements which we'll come out with at a later point and
Mm.
discuss those which kind of summon those up. Really back quickly, like glad to know that your favorite thing is King Arthur. My favorite ruler uh, was the King of Mali. Back I think in sometime it was quite early on, but it was like sometime between 1200 and 1500.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why he's my favorite ruler is because, like, first off, he was a ruler and a philosopher.
Yep.
So, like, either he paid a load of poets to come out with some really good shit, and that is still being peddled today, or he genuinely did write some really good stuff. Uh, like, just some really basic advice, like the most valuable thing you can give someone is their time, or sorry, is your time and attention. And he wrote a load of really good stuff. What I love about him as well is he was the richest man in the world at the time,
Yep.
to the point where his net worth was way beyond Bezos, way beyond anything we've got today. And it's to the point where he was a devout Muslim. He um, went on a pilgrimage and took God knows how many servants with him. And but this is the thing that I like. He he was a devout Muslim, and he gave money to the poor wherever he went. However, because he was incredibly wealthy and didn't necessarily know what was an appropriate amount to give, or what would be, what would give the local economy a boost, he actually caused every town that he went through to have an economic collapse because he'd give them so much gold. He gave them so much gold, gold became worthless. At that
Oh,
point, money became
because obviously
worthless. At that point,
scarcity creates value, doesn't it?
exactly, exactly. And I know it's such a cruel and horrible thing, but what I like about that is that throughout history, you get people who cause disasters because they're seeking power,
Yeah.
because they're seeking control, because they're seeking dominance.
Whereas he caused disasters because he was being generous and kind.
Yes, exactly that, and it's just,
Oh, you've got to love
it,
it.
well, yes, and that's why that's why
It's just the
he's
irony,
my
isn't it?
favorite.
But I was
It's
trying to help.
exactly, like he just, yeah, he, oh, yeah. In fact,
Don't you
like,
know how the economy works, man?
well, well, the annoying thing is
He obviously
uh,
did because he was incredibly rich.
exactly, but it's just like, yeah, there's
Maybe that
such
was
a
his
thing as,
ploy. Maybe that was his
uh,
ploy.
well,
He
I'm
he's
really hoping it's not, because it's just like, in which case then I think it might be one of the first successful en masse things of as en masse examples of financial warfare
Yeah,
and using money as a weapon. I don't think it was, though. I
no,
think it
I think it was
genuinely
just
was.
naivety, a little
Yeah,
bit of
exactly.
naivety. Yeah,
A man who's absolutely plastered in gold, more than Mr. T,
incredible. Yeah,
not
incredible.
realizing that giving someone one of his gold chains is going to destroy the power structure within that community.
Absolutely
Um,
amazing.
but it's also the fact that this was a long term effect. The value of gold did not return in Cairo until several hundred years after he'd been there.
Yeah,
So that gives you an idea of how much he must have given away. Like, it makes me wonder, did people have a golden spoon? Did everyone in the villages where he went through have golden spoons because they'd melted it down to try and just use it as stuff? But anyway, sorry, he's my favorite. He was, yeah, an amazing person, and just the fact that um, outside of stories of saints or like almost godly warriors, just having a bloke who tried to do their best and it went tits up. I kind of can relate to that. Not that I'm a rich man, and not that I'm nearly good enough. Not that I give to charity nearly as much as that, but like just the story. I see it's a good story.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so I think I want to. Obviously, we're going to round off a little bit. I just want to finish off with one more thing that I had, which I wanted to just go over the top three, and this is the top three. Um, the top three mad kings or queens, with the top three kings, because they are kings or leaders, shall we say, male leaders, um, uh, of history. Okay, so the top
Brilliant.
three most um,
Are we talking about like just
insane,
in and are we talking about insane
terrible,
decisions or
terrible,
okay,
just terrible people. So,
okay.
um, third on the list, which I thought was quite interesting that he stood out third, given who he is, was Ivan the Terrible, Ivan IV of Russia.
Uh-huh.
Um,
He's got literally the title the terrible.
yeah, I mean, he was a terrible, terrible person. As in, like it says here, his main fault was his unstable temperament, which manifested itself in bouts of rage and cruelty. Um, and he accidentally killed his own son by hitting him over the head with a pointed staff, because that was going to go well. Um, he Anybody that opposed him, he would kill instantly, um, and eventually. Um,
Yeah, I think that literally yeah, that brings to light kind of the things you were saying earlier about if you lift someone up all of their life,
mm, yeah, I
then
mean,
they're gonna go wrong.
yeah. He was, as I said, like, as the name implies, he was terrible. Like, people
Mm,
genuinely, he didn't lead. He didn't lead with love. He led with fear, and people were terrified of that bloke. Genuinely
yeah,
terrified.
like you hear the king is coming. It's not a, oh
Yeah,
great, maybe we can get stuff done. It's a, oh
yeah,
shit, hide, everyone hide.
yeah.
Yeah,
So second on the list is actually two leaders, but because they're so closely related, I thought I would put them into one. Um, and related as in one is the son of the other. However, they were rulers of different countries. So you had
interesting.
Charles the Sixth of France,
Okay.
who was known as the Beloved. However, at the age of 32, he started to suffer bouts of insanity, where he killed four of his own knights and attacked his brother, and then would have continual bouts of insanity going forwards, which would lead to him having numerous outbursts and killing other people, and became known as the Mad King. And this, they believe, was due to, as is rife within royal bloodlines, it was due to like um,
I was
incestuous
wondering if
behaviours.
we were gonna touch upon that
Yeah.
because I know the most inbred person in history was, I think it might have been Charles II of Spain.
Mm.
He was the last of the Hamburg line
Yeah.
who had been marrying cousins to cousins, aunts to nieces, uncles to nephews, and they'd been doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And when they looked back at his disguise family tree,
Yeah.
like they realized
The
that his
family
own,
stick.
well, yeah, family. Well, that's exactly it. He is in fact more inbred than somebody who had than a brother and a sister. If
Yeah.
a brother and a sister had, like
Absolutely.
they I don't even know how that's possible to get more inbred than that, but I guess it's
It's ridiculous.
generational.
I mean, if you
If you
look at
get
there's a I think it's called Charts or Useful Charts or something like. There's a website somewhere where they actually have done the kings and queens of the UK or of Britain since Anglo-Saxon, since Charlemagne, I believe it was. And it goes like, oh, there's this line that carries on, and then this person has a son, and then like down the line you're like, oh, but then they married that person who was actually the granddaughter of this person back here and was connected to this person by 4 different bloodlines. But another interesting fact, of course, is the fact that, do you know, your niece or your nephew, you share 25% of their DNA. Yeah. You share 25% of your core DNA, which is why and people are like, oh, what about like cousins and second cousins? Between you and your second cousin, you share less than 1% of your DNA. So it's not very distant that it has to go before you're then safe, like biologically, to like to breed, shall we say, and not have that risk of of
insanity.
of insanity through being inbred. So yeah, you just have to look at like general maths, I suppose. It's quite obvious that if you're that closely related to your, like, I suppose, spouse in some ways, then you're gonna cause problems because you're not actually bringing enough diversity into your DNA, which now we know is a massive thing. But obviously back then they didn't. They just wanted to keep the bloodline pure.
They wanted to keep the wealth within a
Yeah,
single
yeah,
household and
yeah.
not
But it's
share it.
it's human
Yeah.
nature, isn't it? It's human nature. It's quite big in all cultures, I think, is keeping money where money is, and power where power is. But anyway, Charles VI actually had a son. His name was Henry VI, and Henry VI was actually the leader in the War of the Roses. And uh, I'm sure you know about the War of the Roses. It was one of the bloodiest times in England's history. Um, and he also was quite an insane king due to his father's incestuous behaviour and his in turn. But I'll move on to the most insane ruler of all time. Number 1 on the list is,
I'll take some guesses.
you go on. Go on, you can have a go
I've,
guess.
I've now said it, so I'm
Yeah.
now King Xerxes
Xerxes, no.
of Greece. No, okay. Um, I can think of a lot of bad kings, but I can't actually.
Well, let's not say king.
Okay, was it Vlad the Impaler? Since
No,
Ivan
terrible.
Terrible was up there.
Terrible, but
Okay,
no, not him. This is
okay,
someone that I think quite possibly is. I mean, I've read quite a lot about this bloke over time, and yeah, genuinely, it deserves to be number 1 on this list.
right, okay. It wasn't. What was the last king of France's name?
No, it wasn't the King of
Was
France.
that the king? It wasn't King
No,
Louis. Was it King
no,
Louis?
no, it wasn't King Louis. No,
Damn it. All right, I'm going to give up. Who was it?
it was the Emperor Caligula.
Yes.
So Caligula was so insane. He used to kill men for sport, just for fun. He would have intercourse with his own sisters. He was demanding people to worship him as a god. And he absolutely plummeted his own empire into financial crisis. The bloke was insane. And eventually he was assassinated, so he got what was coming to him, I suppose.
Good old Joffrey.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
sorry, I've held back on those throughout this whole
No, you're all
conversation, just
good.
because I don't want to. I do want this to genuinely be about facts rather than about fiction. But it's just like, yeah, there's only so far you can push people.
Yeah.
Like, to be fair, a lot of good rulers get killed
Mm.
because people disagree with them. Like, how much of a dick do you have to be before people who were for you are against you?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, he wasn't necessarily a ruler, but he was certainly a leader in of a man. But Martin Luther King, of course, one of the most prolific assassinations. Um,
Mm.
and
Well,
as I said, he
I love
wasn't
the
a
I love the
ruler.
fact that it's his like full title was Doctor Reverend.
Yeah.
Like, he was he a doctor, or was it English literature, or he had a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
He was a practicing minister. Like, yeah, like he
Yeah.
did some amazing stuff,
Yeah.
and he he got killed because of institutional racism, uh, justifying people thinking that they're better than other people.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And final point, I just want to go over this as the final point, and this is the last thing that we'll be saying on this podcast. But do you know what the rule of separation by seven is?
Isn't that you in fact are connected to everyone else in the world by 7 degrees of separation?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so there's always, I'm sorry, I'm gonna count with my fingers here. You know someone who knows 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 someone,
yeah,
and through that connection, you are connected to everyone else in the world,
yeah.
which is crazy when you think about it, because it means that if you rob someone, like,
You're robbing
especially if
yourself.
if you're in your local area, it's going to be what, like 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
not going to go all the way to
yeah.
7.
Exactly that, exactly that. And the main thing there, of course, is you might be quite a recluse and only know 2 or 3 people, but within 3 or 4 separations, you'll reach what we call a hypersocial point, where
Mm,
somebody knows a lot of people, and that's where it goes massive. But the main reason why I bring up the degrees of separation is because um, your family tree. If you go backwards through your family tree, you have your mum and dad. So there's one goes into two, yeah? And then mum
yeah,
and dad have mum and dad. So then two goes into four, yeah? And so on and so forth. It's exponential, and it genuinely does escalate like very quickly, you know. So the reason I'm saying this is because if you trace your own genetics, and it's the same with myself, and it's the same with nearly everybody, I would say, as a matter of fact, I would say hands down, everybody in the UK. If you trace your heritage all the way back, you are connected to Charlemagne, which means in turn, you are royalty.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
So
yeah.
where does royalty come from? Royalty is you. And I think a lot
So
more people in the world would do well to think of themselves in a better light.
I can't argue with that point. That's a very positive point and a good thing to end on.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for listening. And until next time, goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Take care, guys.